Welcome to Develop Lex, a Middle Tech production hosted by me, Weston Lockhart, Ross Boggess, and Evan Knowles. This series will focus on the ins and outs of real estate development and investing, where we'll have the opportunity to sit down with developers of our cities, veterans of the industry, and key people that have over time made a massive impact on communities and neighborhoods. The purpose of this series is to be able to bring a knowledge base to our audience beyond that of what reading a book or watching a how-to video ever could, and educate from those who have done it by hearing their stories, both good and bad, along the way. We feel that historically the learnings of real estate have been inaccessible without being connected, and we would love to open the doors to the next generation of doers, as well as shine a light on how visions of community have been brought to life. We hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Bank of the Bluegrass. It's easy to preach about being a community bank without actually operating that way, but I can attest as a real customer of Bank of the Bluegrass that they are truly in the community and for the community. Whether it's closing a real estate transaction that needs some creativity, troubleshooting an issue where you need a real person on the other end of the phone, or just the simple fact that when you walk in the door, your banker knows your name, Bank of the Bluegrass has you covered. Plain and simple, the best bank in town. Bank of the Bluegrass, member FDIC. NMLS 421548, Equal Housing Lender. Develop Lex is sponsored by SV & Stone Commercial Real Estate, a full-service commercial real estate firm located in Lexington, Kentucky, affiliated with the SVN International Network, which is comprised of over 1,600 advisors and staff and 200-plus offices across the globe. The SV & Stone team consists of experienced commercial real estate advisors in the heart of the Bluegrass. SVN provides commercial real estate services to large corporations, middle market businesses, and individual entrepreneurial investors. Serving the greater Lexington area, SVN offers advisory services for sales, leasing, management, and development of commercial properties locally, regionally, and nationally. With transaction volume of over $400 million, the advisors at SVN Stone Commercial Real Estate have vast experience and deep understanding of all aspects of commercial real estate.
Craftsman Contractors is Central Kentucky's one-stop shop for roofing, windows, siding, and gutters. CraftsmanContractors.com/contact us will get you straight to the form you need so that their team will get in touch about your project. Or just text Steven at 859-246-0108. When they finish your project of windows, siding, gutters, or roofing, you'll see what they mean when they say we build with integrity.
Welcome back to Develop Lex. Today you have Weston and Ross in the studio. We are down at Awesome Inc. on Main Street, and we are very excited to welcome on Joe Rosenberg. I've known Joe since I have been in the industry. Back when I was interning at SVN, I used to walk checks down to get Joe to sign for one of the partnerships that he was involved in back in the day. So I've known Joe for a little while, but we thought it would be really neat to get into kind of his background and all the things that he's been a part of in Lexington, as he has been a staple in the city for a very long time. So Joe, welcome on.
Well, thank you all. This is very kind of you to invite me to spend the morning with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into just a little bit of, upbringing and how you got to where you're at today. So Joe, where are you from?
Well, born and raised in Lexington. I'm Takes Creek, and then later, the last 2 years of Henry Clay. So I graduated Henry Clay and took off to Atlanta to Emory University, and kind of came back here just as things were heating up in '78 and going into fun times.
So what brought you down to Emory, and then what brought you back?
Well, Davidson wouldn't accept me, and so Emory was my next best choice available at the time, and I was fortunate enough to just enjoy life in Atlanta, but I also wanted to get back to Lexington, where it just seemed like a nice place to start a family and raise a family and enjoy some of the things that I had grown up with. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So this usually comes out somehow, but what high school did you go to? Since that every Lexingtonian has to talk about what high school they went to.
Yeah, I was the second graduating class out of the new Henry Clay. So my junior and senior year, I graduated Henry Clay.
Nice. All right, so came back to Lexington from Atlanta. What did you do when you got back to Lexington, and kind of take us to where you got to in most of your professional life?
Sure. My wife, Ricky, and I, who got married in 78, we moved to Frankfort. That was where she was able to get a teaching job, and they, at that time, required you to live in Franklin County to teach in Frankfort. I went to work immediately, or right as soon as we got married, with Linwood and Shirley Wiseman, who were actively developing East Hills and just some of the subdivisions around the then ICE Center, and started learning a little bit about stick construction and the finances of trying to put together duplexes and single-family homes and get them sold. So it was everything was going pretty well until interest rates got up to about 21%, and I'm sitting there looking at a friendly banker who explained to me that he wasn't going to lend me the rest of the money that I had already started drawing against on a duplex, and he said, Joe, you're going to be out of business here pretty quickly, and I just, that was not a fun time for me. I was fortunate enough that I'd grown up in a family business, and I went down to talk to my folks and said, I'm going to have some available time if you all need anyone. And so I got involved in our retail business then, and it helped that I had kind of been exposed to it. My parents had always had some real estate interest as a side hustle to the retail business. I had some uncles who had been involved in real estate, and I was, I guess, lucky that I could make a living in the retail side and still invest or show my interest in real estate without having to live out of it and do it more as a side hustle. So I got my real estate license. Then I went back and got my broker's license. I learned some quick lessons about trust and partnerships and just what my strengths were, what my weaknesses might be, and how to take those and work around them or work to them and use them to my advantage. And fast forward, I'm 69 years old, and I've enjoyed a great time, and this has been fun. I really don't have any complaints, so it's been good.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. So the retail store that I'm familiar with is Rosenberg Jewelers downtown on Main Street. Has that always been the case? No,
Joe Rosenberg Jewelers it started actually at 141 West Vine Street, and in by my grandfather in 1896, and then in 1929 he moved around to the corner of where most of us will remember, Upper and Vine, and signed a 50-year lease in 1929 going into the Great Depression. And he had 10 kids. My father was the baby of 10, and my grandfather passed away before I was born. I'm named after him. And by the time I came into the business in 1979-80, that lease was just burning off. And I was fortunate enough to, I guess, see a little bit of what might be happening with downtown. And they had two pieces of property that they owned on that block at that time, neither of which were the store. They were on either side of the store. They were leasing the store itself. And I said, look, if we're going to be on this block and we enjoy commercial real estate, why don't we just look and see if some of these other properties, when they become available, not pushing anything, but if they might be available and they make sense, this makes sense to invest in our neighborhood, which I think is probably a good strategy for a lot of people in real estate. It just kind of worked out well for us. Every once in a while, we'd get a call from someone on that block who would say, hey, I want to sell something. Sometimes it was an attorney representing a state. I was invited to a symposium, I remember like it was yesterday, with Rose Lucas, who was heading up the Downtown Lexington Corporation at the time. And Woolworths on that block, probably the largest piece of property on the block, had they were ending a long lease, a building that was built for them. The lease, I think, was signed prior to World War II, but it was built probably just after World War II. And it had 54 owners at the time. It had just been little pieces had gone out, this, that, and the other. In fact, I got a check every month for $13.60 and which was very important to me during my college life. It was a date night once a month. I remember that one. But we were sitting in the symposium, and Rose said, they just have signed up for another 10-year extension. It was their last 10-year extension, and they shut down the Woolworths, the whole retail operation, or not the whole retail operation, but in Lexington. And pigeons were flying in the building. All the owners had been asked to put up a new roof, and I believe First Security's trust department was in charge of gathering the money and actually putting the roof on at that point. They put the roof on, but I don't think anyone ever inspected the roof. It was never tied in on the sides, and water was just dripping in. The doors were locked. There was no Woolworth management on site. They were responsible for the building, but the actual landlords were never allowed in the building. We started figuring out that code enforcement wanted to get in the building and see what was happening, and they did. And then Woolworth started talking to us about, maybe they'd get out of the lease early. Well, what happened was that they had a clause in that lease that said that it was built on 5 different parcels owned by 5 different families, and that at the end of their lease, they had to put those parcels back intact and demising walls. So that was kind of counterintuitive to them wanting to end the lease, which they weren't paying much rent on, obviously, coming back from World War II. And we just looked around the room, and Rose looked at me and she said, I think you got to take this on. And I said, take what on? She said, you got to buy it up and put it into some effective use. And I said, well, how do you envision that? What happens there? And she goes, I don't know, but start to work on it. And I did. I had some extra spare time, and I was fortunate enough that I had some family partners who said, go see what you can do. And so we realized that you could not finance these purchases because you weren't going to have the whole, but you had to start dealing with a lot of out-of-state owners. And I had a great attorney who advised me on some of the techniques that we needed to be aware of. And we went out and just started buying up this percent and that percent and whatever was happening. We worked a deal with Staples to go on the ground floor and Kentucky Science and Technology to go on the upper floor. And we were going to put an incubator in there. Chris Kimmel and his then partner, which President Lee Todd from university, they had started Kentucky Science and Technology. And it was an exciting idea. We thought, this is going to work. And we went down to Gray, actually, Gray Construction, and worked with them to figure out a plan that we could remediate and get this building safe and put it back into play, so to speak. When we took it to council, because we had to get a couple of things worked out with them, things were going pretty good, and someone kind of stood up and made a comment that they didn't think that it was fair because I or my family was going to be profiting off of this. And I looked at them and I said, guys, look, if you're thinking that I'm doing this as a nonprofit, then we've clearly mistaken. I clearly am doing this to make some money. So if that's bothering you, then we need to know about it right now. And the council, in their infinite wisdom, did not vote to approve it, and the deal died on that spot, and it couldn't go forward. And Chris was upset, and we couldn't get him in, and Staples decided not to come, and it didn't work. The building sat for a little bit longer, and then the rest is history, as probably some of you remember or whatever. We were fortunate enough to find a good partner with the Webbs, both Don and Dudley, and Woodford. And Don was living at the time. We had a good relationship with them. We did not have anything formal. There was no written agreement. We were able to do what we needed to do to kind of advance and pursue the rest of the block that we did not own at that time. I think we had 80 some odd % of the block in the family, and there were a couple of holdouts that they kind of stepped up and said, we can do this. So we just all joined forces and started what is now a city center, and pretty proud of it. I think it worked out well.
Are you looking to start or scale your real estate portfolio in Central Kentucky? Check out Rapid Fire Investments. They find off-market, discounted real estate deals just for you. so you can save time and maximize profits. From single-family homes to multifamily apartments, no matter what your investment goals are, Rapid Fire can help you reach them. Sign up for their email list today and get notified when new properties become available. Just go to rapidfireinvestments.com. That's rapidfireinvestments.com.
That's pretty incredible. I definitely want to go back and touch on City Center because I think there's a ton of story behind that. Can you talk a little bit about the process and for people that are trying to do similar things of what were you actually, you said 54 individual owners.
Yeah.
What were you actually doing to make contact, especially back then when it wasn't like you could just Facebook message them? How were you?
Yeah.
How were you?
Those were some fun phone calls. Let me tell you. We would send letter. First, we established a price per foot that we were willing, and that came about early. That actually came about from a cousin of mine who lived out of state, and he said, Joe, he said, look, I'll sell my piece, but when I sell my piece, I want an assurance from you that if you pay more per foot to any other owner, that you'll have a catch up with me. And I realized that was going to start happening with everyone, and it was the fair thing to do. Just because I couldn't, get them all in the same room and get everyone to agree to do it. The ownership was a sense of pride to some of these people who had never been to Kentucky. They just had inherited their piece from whatever it was going to be. I didn't know. I wasn't related. These were strangers that the only commonality we had was that we all had a little piece of this Woolworth property. And we were very fortunate. Most people kind of understood the program. We'd look them up. We'd send an introductory letter. We'd try to listen to their story and understand their story. We actually had one that was pretty interesting to me. Fascinating is the wrong word, I guess. I had a lady that I'm talking to, and I wish I could tell you where she lived right now. I'm thinking it was Colorado. And she just wanted to tell me how upset she was, that she and her sister had both inherited a piece of this from their mother or their aunt, or I don't know, whatever it was. And they'd never been to Kentucky, but she was getting her check, which was more than my $13.60. I forgot what her check was. And her check stopped a couple years ago. And she knows that her check was going to her sister, and her sister wasn't splitting it out with her, and that she would not agree to sell her piece until she got that money. And I had to go get it from her sister. And my attorney, John Bryce, was sitting in the office at the time, and I got her on speakerphone, and he kind of motions for me to put her on hold, and he goes, how much money do you think she's talking about? And we're doing the quick math, and we figured this thing up, and I just took her off hold, and I said, done, I'll get it for you. And obviously at that point I realized it wasn't much, and I made sure that she got her money. Yeah. and then she was happy to sell at that point. So it was like, I don't know why things happen like that. I mean, it was crazy that, the idea that there were interests that were just being passed along, and that it was really causing a blight on our downtown core, with this just sitting empty and pigeons and water just running into the building. It just wasn't helpful to any of us. So we needed to get that one moving.
And for people that may not know Lexington as well as we did, this is going to be on the Main Street face of the 100 block now.
Yep.
And was it in between Rite Aid and the Dame? Was that where?
Yeah. So it was actually right next to Rite Aid, and it faced on 3 streets. So it had a small opening onto Limestone, and then the full backside on Vine Street. And what was interesting about the Vine Street portion, and only I think 2 of the 5 properties actually had any piece of that. But when urban renewal came along, there was an extra 20-foot strip that wound up being deeded to those owners. So it got a little more complicated. I think the building partial, all the buildings together, are about 18,000 feet. And so we, it was a labor of love. It took us a year and a half, maybe a little closer to 2 years to tie it up. And as I started to say earlier, one of the biggest problems that I had personally is that financially it was tough for me. I was not in a position to go out and buy these out of pocket. So wasn't able to put any debt on these purchases because the the other 53 owners at the time were not going to be excited about
Yeah.
me indebting their property. So it was a little complicated for me at that early stage of my life to make it happen. But in hindsight, the numbers were not huge. At the time, they were sizable to me, and that one was complicated, but it worked out. The most difficult one that I had, well, probably had a couple difficult ones, but the most difficult one I had was the former Graves Cox building. That one was Mr. Gatton had bought that, and he tore down that building without too many people complaining about tearing down that old historic building, actually, and turning it into a parking lot. And when he did, I thought, well, I don't know what he's doing, but I don't really care. I don't have any particular interest in it, and so I wasn't trying to assemble the block. It wasn't anything that I was doing at that. But later, as it became necessary for us to get it, I was no longer able to do the deal with Kentucky Science and Technology or Staples. I said, I think we're going to need this parking lot and kind of touch pieces now. I reached out to him, and the response that I got was awe-inspiring. At that point, I learned how to deal with someone who didn't really care whether or not he sold a piece of property. He set a price, and the price was just higher than anything I had seen for that kind of square footage, and it may have been a record price at that point, I think. I don't know. All I know is that I spoke to one of his cohorts at the time, and I said, what am I going to do about it? And the advice was, you're either going to pay it or you're going to forget about it, because he's not going to take anything any less. And it was take a deep breath and go find a good banker who would loan me money, because I was going to buy the whole thing if I was going to buy it. And I stepped up, but it was a tough one for me. I mean, there was no way to make that one make sense other than the whole block development.
Yeah. And so right now, really, it sounds like we're kind of getting into what would be called assemblage, which I have found really fascinating. I follow a bunch of people that work in Manhattan or larger cities where that's really common. So obviously with assemblage, there's a lot of different personalities you have to deal with. But at the end of the day, you're improving, your whole block, and you as a neighbor realistically are inheriting the wealth of the appreciation and all the things of you making the property better. So are there any kind of other assemblage stories like that you have from downtown Lexington?
Yeah, I always think about assemblage, and that's a great word, as a positive. It's some people see it as a negative. They think that you could be taking advantage of a neighbor because you're going to do something. Sometimes the vision, and I don't want to think of myself as a visionary, but I certainly saw that block as having more potential than what it was when I first arrived on it. You need to either have patience, deep pockets, great partners. All these things kind of have to come together, because it's really difficult to just start grabbing individual pieces and making them make sense, or have the ability to just sit on them when they don't make sense. And so I did not have the ability to have empty or vacant properties just waiting for me to complete the puzzle. Everything that we sought or went after, we were less aggressive in the beginning, as I said, but once we kind of started saying, let's go get some of these things, we needed to make sure that we could either collect rents off of them that made sense. In the Graves Cox lot, it was already a parking lot. Whether or not it made sense to continue it as a parking lot, there were different things that we just had to figure out. Are these good real estate moves, regardless of whether or not they happen to be adjoining property lines? What happens with assemblage, in my mind, is that you have to keep that in balance, because as a couple other projects that I've been involved with, where you need a neighbor's piece of property, they can hold you up pretty easily. And if your property becomes more valuable to somebody who needs it as opposed to somebody who wants it. And so one of the things that I learned early on is that I'm pretty transparent, and I'm not trying to sneak around and do a lot of things behind anyone's back. So I want to let people know my intentions as soon as I know my intentions, or it's ready to be out there. And then I kind of let it, percolate it. If somebody wants something or they don't. We made a deal with one of our last purchases. We made it probably 10 years before we actually got it. The deal was, it was the Mad Hatter, actually. He had some difficulty coming up with monies to repair a storm drain in an alley that we all shared. And he just, he wasn't happy about it. And the water flowing into his business was just damaging the building. And it was a problem for him. And I said, look, we need this fixed. We all need this fixed, all of us that were on that alley. And I think it was about a $25,000 his portion fix. And I said, if I put up the money, I would like a right of first refusal on your property should you ever decide to sell it. And that turned out to be the way that we eventually got that piece of property. Was that it had already gotten out. He had come into the paper and started saying that he didn't want to move, he didn't want to do this, that, and the other, but that we own most of the rest of the block, and that he was being forced to move, which wasn't true, obviously. And then he one day he walks into my office and he says, "Look what I got! I got an offer from somebody to buy my piece of property." I said, "Good for you. Let me see the offer." And we took the offer and matched it, and that was the end of that. So
You make things so simple. I want to take your personality and just do that with all my deals. That's awesome.
Well, but there was nothing bad about that. But, we had the publicity obviously wasn't fun. I really did not enjoy being seen as somebody who was not being fair. All of the tenants that I had later in the development of that block or acquisition of that block, they all signed leases where they understood that that there was development opportunity down the road, and should they be asked to terminate the lease, there was large buyouts. We had fun relationships. One of the guys who used to be in that block is a current partner of mine in another real estate deal. I mean, we've really looked at this as what's best, and it's not just what's best for me, but it's what's best overall. This is a community that I care a great deal about. I live in this community. We have we've raised a family in this community. We have been, I think, very charitable in this community, giving back to this community. So I don't want to mess things over. I want to drive by and be as proud as punch that this is one of the nicest developments that we could have ever put there. So it's pretty exciting.
That's pretty incredible. So another one of those developments is what people would know today as City Center. And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit and that whole block. What is your capacity in all of that? And what's some backstory on that building?
Well, so City Center is where Woolworth used to be. And as we put that block together, and I've had these conversations with Dudley, originally Don and Dudley and Woodford, we start coming up with ideas of how to do it. They are experienced developers. I think of myself as more of a real estate investor. And I learned a little bit from them. I didn't learn a lot, but I learned a little bit watching this process. I learned, timing. I learned, the economic flow. I've always been interested in the capital markets. I see real estate as an imperfect market, and it doesn't really work exactly the way I'd like it to do all the time. But expecting the community to come up with a voice to describe how you should be spending your private dollars was something that I'd never run up against, just never seen that. It wasn't that it didn't happen. It didn't happen in other places to other people. It's just I'd never firsthand experience with it. I think.
What was the craziest thing somebody told you should do with the city center?
Well, the polo field was probably better. Yeah, and I looked at Dudley the minute he decided, and he was the partner in it. And the minute he decides, he goes, well, right now we're just going to put some sod down and put up a fence, and the equestrian games are coming to town. We're going to put a polo field there. And I go, no. As we do that, no one's ever going to want us to draw a building permit to do anything else. This is going to be a city park then from that point on. And I said, and I don't think it's going to be economically viable for those of us that own it to make it into a city park. So we did it. People loved it. We had someone want to get married there. It was fun, but it was a place card holder, and it was to beautify things. And while we were showing Lexington to the world during the World Equestrian Games, I don't know. It was such a story. In fact, I've asked Dudley to write a book on it. I mean, it was funny. I learned a couple great things. He taught me one that I've always had patience, and I've always thought that I'm pretty good with people, and I don't, I like I said, I build trust. I don't really have problems. I try not to get angry or disappointed in people, but I also I'm not one to hold a grudge, but I just find that there's just no need for me to get myself involved with working with people who don't want to work with me. And he taught me. He said, Joe, he said, let me tell you. He said, whenever you see an obstacle, he said, you just got to remember that that person who's presenting that obstacle may be coming at it from different reasons. There could be different things that are happening. He said, but when it comes time to celebrate, they'll want to celebrate. They'll be the one there, who are raising a toast and doing whatever. And turning the other cheek, I guess, is the way I view that, has been really important for me. He does it as well as anyone I've ever seen. I'd look at Woodford from time to time and I go, does he not hear this stuff? And he says, no, that's just his personality. So I was fortunate that he was in the process and kind of keeping a lot of it tamped down for us. I think he, taught me that lesson anyways.
Fun. I bet there are a ton of lessons in this capacity of real estate, especially when you're in that same neighborhood for a long time. Speak to that a little bit, if you would. What kind of drew you to that part of town? Obviously, downtown is where you've spent a lot of your time. You may have some other properties outside of downtown, but kind of what drew you down there?
Well, my family obviously had been on that block. My father was born at 225 West High Street, which is the backside of what is now the Truist parking lot, and faced the church, First Methodist, I think it is there. And we just used to always come downtown. I can remember my first job was at Kent's Menswear, straightening men's shirts. Just kind of I was in maybe middle school. It might have been sixth grade. I don't know what I was, but I was a young guy, and I had to spend an hour or two downtown, and I'd go in there and straighten these shirts, and they'd pay me pennies literally to straighten shirts, and it was kind of fun. But I walked this town when we used to have to get dressed to be downtown. Nobody showed up in blue jeans. You presented yourself, and we had a lot of people downtown. They were the sidewalks had 3 or 4 people wide going all day long, and it was fun. And I got to know the city a little bit. I was comfortable here. It wasn't. It was manageable. If I didn't know the business, I might know somebody who knew the business. If I didn't know the owner, I might know somebody who knew the owner. So the research in the 70s and 80s and early 90s was institutional knowledge. I mean, that was really kind of one of the ways that you kind of figured out, does this make any sense? My father, who unfortunately is no longer living, I can remember he and I going to lunch one day, and while we're going to lunch, there's an auction at, I think it's 351 West Short. It was an old hardware store next to the parking lot there. And Jim Riley is the auctioneer, and we're walking down the street, and he calls us out by name. And he says, Harry, he says, you and Joe want to bid on this? And we're just walking to lunch. And Dad says, no, I really hadn't taken a look at it. He goes, well, hold on a second. He says, walk it through there and take a look at it. And he stops the auction. And we walked through this old building, and it had a dirt floor in the back, and came out, and he says, what do you think? And Dad said, where are you? And I think he said $65,000. He goes, well, I'll give 66 for it like that. And boom, next thing you know, we bought this piece of property. and we literally walked out to lunch.
Expensive lunch.
It was an expensive lunch. I think 5 years later we might have gotten close to selling it for a $50,000 profit. But I think we had. Oh, I know what it was. We put a card shop in there, which turned out to be Ann Higgins, whose family owned K.R. Higgins, and they wound up buying the building from us. So it was like the stuff works. And that's one of the nice things about not only Lexington, but just real estate in general, is that if you have that ability to wait and can and be fortunate, it'll either come around or you'll figure out another use for it, or something kind of comes to you. But you just have to be engaged. If you're not engaged, then you're sitting on the sidelines, always going, "Oh, I wish I'd done that," or "I wish I'd done that." So, if you can ever get to the point where you can just get in, I think that the process seems to work pretty well.
Pretty incredible. Maybe I'll go to lunch today and see what I can drum
Yeah.
up.
I always got to stay away from those auctioneers now.
Yeah. No, I've heard that the best piece of advice when going to an auction is keep your hands in your pockets.
That's probably true.
Cool. So today, Joe Rosenberg, what exactly are you doing today? And if you were interested in investing in real estate, in the year of 2023, what do you think that you'd be interested in?
So we sold our retail business to Jim Triantafilu, who had been working with us for probably 20 years prior to that. And he's a nice young man who has decided, not because it was written that he to do it, but he's decided to keep the name going. He's still located at 163 East Main Street, Suite 100. And I have my office in the back of there, as I've had for years. He and I get along well. He asks me to cover for him when he's not in town, and I enjoy the retail business. It's obviously where I got my start, and I learned a lot of great things there that I think are life lessons that actually I think have helped me, and more than just real estate, or more than retail. It's helped me in real estate, helped a lot of things. But the things that interest me today are a little bit different than what would have interested me 30 years ago. I'm a big partner guy. I always like partners. I've always thought that it's better to have a piece of something than all of a bad deal. And I don't really like to do bad deals. So partnerships never scared me. I think of myself as a generalist rather than a specialist. So I want other people that know a lot about what they're doing to be my partners. And from an operations side, that works well with my semi-retirement. If I'm now 69 years old, how do I see going forward? The question of what do I do real estate wise and how would I invest today is a little bit different because of age and stage than what I would recommend people to do. I think that when you're starting out, it's important that you pick projects that will allow you to sleep at night and not give you so much heartburn, that just get you crazy. I usually tell my friends who are serious about it, I say, look, if you can start with some duplexes, fourplexes, anything that will allow you to kind of get going without costing you a fortune, I think that kind of makes sense. The rents are constant. You can push them. And more importantly, if you have a vacancy, you probably aren't going to miss a meal. Whereas as soon as you take it up a notch and you start having tenants that are paying you tens of thousands of dollars a month, those vacancies can cause a little heartburn. Just that's kind of, you need to have enough numbers to make it make sense to go after that. You have to have a balance sheet that allows you to go after it. Most people that I know starting out don't have those things. They just, they're kind of beginning, so to speak. The mission today is literally try to deploy capital with, get a good yield without too much risk. And I do that a couple of different ways. I'm a private equity guy now today. I really do see that works well for my life. I try to pick good managers. I've had great partners. If I can find an industry or a sector that I think is particularly interesting, and by that I mean not getting slaughtered, then that's where I want to be. The problem with real estate is that because it's a long-term play, sometimes I'm in things that if I had the foresight 6 years ago, I wouldn't have been. So I don't have a lot of retail today. We say grace over very few actual 100% ownership in properties. We have a lot of interest in, or a fair amount of interest in pieces that are running all the way from industrial to multifamily, to a little bit of retail. Restaurants were always good for us. We've got one partnership that they always wanted to do, build-to-suits, and that was always fun. I liked it. It was great as long as you could find them. And I think, as you said, Weston, you can get somebody who points you in a direction and go find a site and let's go build one, or buy one or do whatever. Those are always fun, but they don't happen as quickly as you want them to all the time. But those relationships can sometimes turn, and the next thing you know, that person's in charge of something else, and they pick up the phone and you get going. So it is a long process for the most part, but I encourage everyone to do it. I think that people who get involved with it rarely are disappointed. They don't necessarily have the success that they set out to have immediately, but I think overall it kind of works out. I can remember the first time I had a 20-year mortgage pay out. And I mean, I was like ready to celebrate and buy drinks for the whole place. I said that was just that was cool. It's like I'm going, wow, this works. I mean, it's just fun. And when that happens, that's pretty interesting. So yeah, I tell people you really do need to look at this as where you can fit in. It is not a plug and play that it works for everyone, but if you've got an interest in it, it's a great industry to be involved with.
That's incredible. So, as it relates to that industry and as it relates to Lexington, what do you see in Lexington right now when you drive around the city that you're most excited for moving forward?
Well, Lexington, and I was on the chamber for a number of years. When I grew up, it was 60,000 people. And today, because we're 300 and some odd thousand, and it is having little growth issues, as most places are. And I think that's good. I think that it's always good to kind of challenge ourselves. We have some uniqueness here that we certainly want to keep in check, and we don't want to go, running off horse farms and used to be tobacco, now it's bourbon or whatever is going to be the secondary causes or whatever things that people think of Lexington for. How we do it and how we streamline that process has always been interesting to me. I'm not one that wants to get in and fight City Hall or upset the apple cart. I think that we need to always have our welcome sign out, and we need to encourage people to come here. I've been involved with out-of-state developers who have come to this town and found it very challenging or frustrating that they haven't always gotten the answers that they want as quick as they want, or that they've had meetings set up that were across multiple departments or areas that they thought could have been pulled together in an easier manner or consolidated into one. Those are not my frustrations. Those are kind of things that I hear from other people. I take them to heart because I am a Lexingtonian and I really don't want this city to ever be seen as less. I also think that the flip side to it is it kind of protects those of us in Lexington. We don't have as many out-of-state developers running into town trying to do a deal here, and it kind of leaves more for us. But I don't really think that we should ever do that as a game plan. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we send out the message that we don't have a business-friendly environment. I think that there's opportunity for us. I am real concerned about the retail sector. I've always been concerned as a downtown person that we don't have enough retail down here. I think losing Staples to me personally was just a a nail in the coffin. It was just, I couldn't imagine that we wouldn't do everything we could at that time to get a large retailer, particularly an office supply house, into downtown Lexington. I mean, there was just no reason not to do that. But we have to realize we're living in a new economy, and that there are things that are not retail-ish that we can make work here, and we're going to have to figure that out. When we look at the proximity that Lexington has to the rest of the country, and start thinking about how we can service that, all kinds of fun things come to mind. When we think about the housing issue here, the multi-housing, the single-family houses, this is stuff that the home builders and the realtors and developers are all trying to figure out how we can make it more affordable, how we can have consistency in prices that'll sustain itself, and then what kind of rents we can get if we're renting this product out. That's not really a big focus of mine. I have family members that are involved in that side of life, and I'm always happy to chat with them about it. But I don't really. It's not. I was never really passionate about that side of it. I'm kind of. I don't know. I'm kind of now thinking that if we can see Lexington as something a little bit larger than that quaint little horse town, it's going to be better for all of us. And believe me, I don't like sitting in traffic, and I don't like having to fight for a parking spot or do anything any more than anyone else. So growth presents its issues, but it also gives us more opportunity to find interesting places to eat, or whatever. So it's a checks and balance and yin and yang, and it kind of works.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have that conversation a lot for sure, and I think we're on a similar page. So as an outro, we're starting this. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. There's about 1 million people that you could name for this, but if you had to pick a few guests that you would like to hear from on Develop Lex, name a couple names and we'll try to get them.
Well, first, I think any of the mayors, past mayors or current mayors, I think your list is probably light on that. I don't know that you've had a lot of mayors show up and chat with you, but I think that would be a good get. To that point, I'd also try the Kevin Atkins of the world, and I think someone like Brett Collar, who is a Lexingtonian, even if he claims Cincinnati now, between his investments in the city and just his love of Lexington, I think that he's got a worldview that might be a little different than some, and it'd be good to hear from him. I'd recommend my wife. She's Ricky's our head philanthropist in the family, and she heads up our charitable foundation, and I think that she could chat about all the great things that need to be done in this city too. So, but this is probably more real estate oriented. I don't know what other names you want, but give me a little longer to think about it, and I'll help you with that list.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're always just looking for new perspectives on the show, but your perspective has been awesome, Joe. We really, really appreciate you coming on and all that you've done for the city of Lexington.
Well, thank you all for having me. It was kind of a fun morning.
Well, thank you. I know you shied away from being called a visionary earlier, but I see the visionary in you, how you're making the heartbeat of Lexington a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words.
Develop Lex is a part of the Middletech family of brands. This episode is edited by Jacob Spencer. Emily McCarthy creates our social content that serves you daily.